Taramai, good day and welcome everyone. I'm Craig Bleakley, Safety Risk Specialist here at ecoPortal. It's awesome to have you here with us today. In today's session, we'll explore why designing workplaces that protect and promote psychosocial, social and physical well-being is more important than ever. As awareness grows around psychosocial hazards, many industries are recognizing the need to address issues like unbalanced job demands, low role clarity and recognition, poor organizational design, those toxic relationships, and environmental conditions. And then all of that can lead to harm such as stress, fatigue, burnout, and other mental and physical issues. If left unmanaged, these risks can undermine trust, reduce productivity, and compromise overall safety and the business itself. Now, regulators are setting clearer expectations around proactive strategies, but for many health and safety leaders, the challenge lies in bringing psychosocial safety to their day-to-day operations. And so to explore this very timely topic, we're pleased to be joined by Vanessa Cooper, the Principal Advisor at WorkSafe New Zealand, and Terry Buckingham, Wellbeing Lead at ASB Bank. Now, first, Vanessa Cooper, she is the Principal Advisor at WorkSafe New Zealand, Mahi Hamaru Aotearoa, the primary health and safety regulator. Her work focuses on mentally healthy workplaces and psychosocial risk management, with the goal of making these risks better understood and integrated into risk management processes. And Terry Buckingham is the Wellbeing Lead at ASB Bank, where he is responsible for designing and leading the wellbeing strategy for over 6,000 employees. He has enhanced ASB's commitment to duty of care by helping to engage teams with practical tools and information related to psychosocial risks. I would also like to mention that Terry and Vanessa are steering committee members of the new Workplace Wellbeing Professionals Aotearoa, which is New Zealand's newest professional HSW association, specifically set up to provide support and a place for those that work in this area to connect. Very exciting. Check out this new group at www.pa.co.nz. Vanessa and Terry, it's wonderful to have you join us today. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, thanks for having us.
Hey, well, the first question I have for the two of you is, and I've just spotted there's an echo sign, so I'm just going to change something for the team just in case. Let's do that. Okay, so the first question I have for the two of you, Vanessa and Terry. Right, many health and safety leaders still find it really challenging to understand their role in managing psychosocial risks. Culturally, I suppose these issues are often seen as the responsibility of HR, and I think we've all experienced that. But both from a regulatory and a frontline perspective, can you explain why psychosocial hazards need to be managed just like any other health and safety risk? Let's crack off with you, Vanessa, from a regulatory perspective.
Yeah, well, I would agree that there is a lot of misunderstanding around psychosocial and particularly what they are, but also how to integrate it into your regular health and safety approach. It tends to be a bit of a hot potato between, say, HR and health and safety. And if you look at some of the work that we've got in our new guidelines, you can see that there is a lot of overlap. So in between roles and responsibilities. So it is really important that this is a collaborative and collective approach to how we manage health and safety issues. But of course, as the primary health and safety regulator, we're very interested in how people develop their risk management approach. The hope is that psychosocial risks will become quite a standard part of that health and safety approach. But essentially, since 2015, it is the law. So the Health and Safety at Work Act does describe health as both physical and mental health. So there is a lot to do to understand not just how the psychological side of things contribute, but also the contribution of both physical and mental. There isn't the dualism of mind and body is a thing of the past. So we really need to get a little bit more sophisticated in how we think about harm. And I will admit I have a bit of a bias. I do see psychosocial probably is one of the leading root causes of even physical safety risks. And
Sure.
a lot of that comes down to good worker engagement and people feeling safe to raise issues without repercussions. So,
Great.
yeah, over to you, Terry.
Yeah, Terry, so from a frontline perspective, there's often been the challenge that people are thinking psychosocial risk, it's all touchy-feely, so it needs to belong in the HR realm, where reality is very different. From your perspective and experience, why should these hazards just be treated like any other health and safety risk?
Yeah, no, I don't know about you guys, but I'm often interested in the why. Why do people feel like that? Why do people feel like that it needs to be different? And I think fundamentally what it comes down to is that we have health beliefs, right? Rightly or wrongly, and often subconscious biases around health beliefs, around whether we even believe that, well-being, health, psychosocial risk stuff should be done at work, right? Should we be diving into this stuff at work? And I think that's one of the things you often have to address off the bat with not only frontline, but also with leaders. In other words, let's get that out of the way. And often the way to do that is just to do a little bit of myth busting at the start, just to help people to understand the interplay between work and mental health and why we feel like we do. Like whenever we start a conversation around well-being, you can feel people, right? You can feel the passion in the room. So people are really interested in this stuff. And then they often start talking about how they feel about well-being as opposed to dealing with well-being. And that's sometimes worth acknowledging in the room.
I'm going to go off script straight away because this is a really interesting question. This question is really around where the psychosocial risk management lies as well within an organization. And would it be fair to say that often a health and safety manager has been less confident in picking up this as a risk that they are responsible for and want to manage because there's a perceived skill set gap from a traditional health and safety manager in the journey that they've got onto to get into that particular role, and even at that level they may push out the responsibility to an HR manager peer that they may have?
I don't know if it's necessarily that. I think you do have to get comfortable being uncomfortable though with this topic, right? Like you do have to spend some time getting to know it, understand it, and understand your own perspective and your own beliefs is that you bring to this. That is really important to acknowledge. And then I really don't think you need to be an expert necessarily. I'm a bit of a generalist. I call myself a generalist when it comes to health, well-being, and mentally healthy work. In fact, we call it mentally healthy work at ASB because the terminology psychosocial risk was seen by our leaders as being a little bit scary and unapproachable. So we've turned it around a little bit. But I also like the term mentally healthy work because it talks about the work, right? Let's create mentally healthy work so that our people can thrive, as opposed to let's create thriving individuals so they're healthy at work.
Yeah, makes complete sense. Vanessa, in New Zealand, sorry, please carry on. Yep.
Just if I can add there, the health and safety regulator has a specific niche, and we're the regulator for the Health and Safety at Work Act. But one of the things that we have done in the recently published guidelines is to start to think about not just the risks, but the protective factors. So I think there is it's not just about controlling risks. Some of the things that lead to what we are calling mentally healthy work are things about developing culture and developing worker engagement and developing support mechanisms, buddy systems, etc. Now, those are interventions that might be seen outside of health and safety, and I don't mind who does it, but really we know that we can't just spend our time doing kind of whack-a-mole of risks. You need to develop a culture in which it's supportive of people being able to raise concerns without penalty. So I see that as an organizational response that I would really love to see more roles working together on that.
So you've almost answered my next question there, Vanessa. Nicely done. So you've pointed out that obviously the legislation does exist around that requires organizations to manage these psychosocial risks. And you've just referenced these new guidelines that you've just released at WorkSafe New Zealand to help health and safety leaders embed that into the day-to-day work. Is there anything else you want to add in terms of why WorkSafe felt that it was important to publish this resource, and any other key messages you'd like leaders to take away from this resource that was published over and above the legislation that already exists?
Well, good timing. I mean, our first piece of guidance around this area was actually in 2014 with the first bullying guidance work that was done. I was at the Department of Labour at that time and was lucky enough to work on that. We got the green light from the minister and worked on that. We also developed a work-related health strategy in 2016, which started to try and articulate kind of all of the components around health. So when we think about psychosocial, we do consider all of those other aspects of physical, biological, chemical, and ergonomic risks that people experience. But I think also with growing maturity internationally, particularly the ISO 45003 that came out, I think, in 2022. So the International Standards Organization brought together a lot of experts across the world, and that is the basis for how we've developed guidance. Also, the Australian regulators developing a lot more information. So we've realised there's a gap. We realise that a lot of New Zealand businesses have had to look across the ditch and try and get information and guidance that way. Our intention is to start filling that gap. So from 2022, we've had a team stood up to actually develop those pieces of guidance, and this is just the starting point. Yes, it is very broad. It kind of sets the context, but hopefully it helps people understand the general scope of where psychosocial practice lays and some considerations. We will be developing more information to help people with things like risk registers, maybe it's return to work, and we're very interested in hearing from people around what would be helpful to make the guidelines and our guidance a lot more effective and helpful for them in the long term. But really, this is a long time coming, and we need to get in step with the international good practice.
No, fantastic. It's a question that might have just come through. We've got an act with a guideline. Can we expect any specific regulations or any other codes of conduct, policies, processes, procedures, any other further guidance material from this initial guideline? Is that part of your roadmap journey from the regulator, Vanessa?
Yeah, there certainly will be more guidance coming out. At the moment, we're focusing in on 4 priority sectors. So you would have seen that the approved code of practice was just released by the minister on Thursday, which was forestry. Next is agriculture. So that's the approach. So we're fitting in within those priorities, and we will have more information coming up on our website, which will be more tools and things. I think one of the areas that I personally would love to see a lot more is around work design. So it's kind of the bread and butter of good health and safety. It's the stuff that keeps people safe at work, understanding what their roles and expectations are. So that's an emerging area of practice. So would really love to also work with people involved in exposure to trauma, violence and aggression, I think, are some of our critical risks that we're looking at the moment.
Cool. So Terry, we've got legislation, we've got now new approved code of practice, we've got guidelines. From your perspective, from your experience in leading wellbeing strategies, it's all well and good. What do you really define as the biggest challenges organizations face when it does come to ensuring the psychosocial safety on the front line?
For us at ASB, we know that aggression is a risk. We're, at banks, we are very similar to retail in that we have people coming in our doors, right, across our banking advice centres, often in distress. And, I was just looking at a really interesting stat the other day that, we have 10 times the amount of people now withdrawing money through hardship, and that's not an ASB thing, that's a New Zealand wide thing. So $300 million nowadays is withdrawn every year from KiwiSaver, and that was $30 million 10 years ago. So we've had a tenfold increase essentially in people that are actually under financial hardship and distress. And what's the top two things that will cause people distress and mental distress? It's relationships and finances. And so, you know, all these things kind of are not necessarily a surprise to people. But yeah, I really do think if we think internally about our workplaces and what, you know, is affecting people, it's both those external drivers, but also those internal drivers around, you know, workload, work demands. You know, in New Zealand, there's no room, right? There's no reserves, I should say. There's no one sitting there waiting, you know, to help you, you know, in your work every day necessarily. We're often just filling gaps actually day to day. So I don't want to paint too grim a picture there, because I like to think in New Zealand we have some of the best and amazing work environments. But as Vanessa mentioned, where the rubber meets the road and where the challenges is around work design, so we can design out some of that workload and work demand.
Nice. Vanessa, from your perspective, having worked in the space for a long time as well, are there a couple of, you know, what would you define as the top three challenges you've seen in your world of what organizations face when ensuring psychosocial safety?
I think leadership is a challenge. I think that some of the needs are about being genuine, developing trust, and encouraging workplace engagement. Stigma continues to culturally limit our ability to kind of normalize the conversations around struggle. And I'm not just talking about work-related struggle. I'm talking about life course struggle. You know, people get illnesses. Some of these things are quite temporary, but we're not very good at asking for help. But leadership is also, I hear, is quite uncomfortable with kind of having those genuine conversations. And it does feel like sometimes it does open up a level of scrutiny. I do want to make it really clear that the mental health or the health issues that people bring into the workplace are not necessarily something that we would expect an employer to have to manage unless it poses a risk to work. But leadership is about caring and helping people through the tough times at work. And sometimes the things that, so if you're experiencing depression, it's not that you need to be a psychologist and be offering them clinical support. It's actually that you need to say, look, this is what we need from you. These are the expectations. Here's your workload. Can we negotiate that? Use of good, reasonable accommodations, and just having the conversation. So it's not about knowing all the answers. It's about trying to find that space in which genuine conversations can happen. So until we get to that point, I think we're going to have some challenges with actually understanding what this is in the workplace. Yeah.
Cool. Right, on to my favorite question of today. It will be, because this is a really key focus on the topic of today's session. So I'll frame it up. A key part of psychosocial safety is understanding, and there's some questions that are coming through already that are really related to this, which is great. It's the key part is understanding how work is designed and the social and physical conditions that people experience every day. Terry, you've already alluded to this. But often organizations focus mostly on minimizing harm or supporting people once they've been affected. So how can companies shift towards a truly proactive approach, one that focuses less on treating the symptoms and more preventing on harm in the first place? Vanessa, I'll start with you.
What we do know is that I'll speak about this first. So generally, this is the framework. We've divided up risk into three clusters. and that is the risk factors in work design. So I won't read those out, but your role and expectations, your job control, like being able to manage your workflow and have some say in that, and understanding what your job is, and your work scheduling is a big part of that. The social factors, so who you work with, how you work with them, that's a very big part of the whole psychosocial. So, and just a reminder that psychosocial is really just the person in interaction with their environment. And the work environment is a big part of that. So the physical amenities that are provided, and it can go into noise and light and other things. But together, these are the general risk factors. So these provide you a bit of an understanding of not all the risks, but some of the risks that you might want to consider. But the next slide is really what we're calling the levels of intervention, or it's an adaptation of the hierarchy of controls. And you can see there that really what is most effective is eliminating risk, so preventing the risk from occurring. And these tend to be kind of organizational factors. And they might be some of your kind of, having good role definitions, understanding where support, understanding how to connect through to other people, having good policies and procedures, using ways of measuring performance and getting feedback. So worker engagement is a really big part of just that kind of high level elimination of risk. The minimizing risk can be a little bit more targeted. So it might be a specific task, a specific team, a specific site. And that it might involve training and more kind of fitting the person to the role type of approach. And then what we do find is that most people are just kind of, harm has occurred and now we need to minimize it, or we need to respond. That's not effective. To use a poor analogy, it's kind of a little bit like whack-a-mole. Somebody's harmed, somebody's doing this, and it's kind of like, it's a very reactive space. You will never get out of that space unless you start to look above. But really, the most effective thing is to use a multi-level approach. So you're not just sitting in one of those areas, you're looking at how they fit together. And when somebody is harmed, you're learning from that and you're feeding that back up into your approach to eliminating risk. So we know from the evidence that it is most effective to stick to the top of that area, which is eliminating risk. And that's about preparing yourself for understanding the challenges in the work, understanding that from the people most directly impacted by the work, and having leaders involved in those conversations to keep the keep the conversation going, and make it, and as I've said before, kind of normalizing the approach to the human aspects of work.
Awesome. I'm really looking forward to seeing how that is that's appreciated and accepted through. Terry, any from a frontline perspective, from what Vanessa has reported, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, in terms of trying to apply it practically, I think start somewhere is the kind of key message from me. And I think that's where we've, I think as professionals, got a little unstuck, potentially with our leadership teams too, around potentially taking scattergun approaches, doing lots of little things, not necessarily being able to solve the whole. Or we've done risk assessments, right? We've done risk assessments across our organisation, and we've lifted the lid on how much risk we have out there, but we haven't had ready the solutions for that, and often because it's too big to solve in the whole. So actually breaking it down into, okay, what are our kind of top 3 areas where we know we've got a bit of risk? For us, in banks, again, if I could use us as an example, we have, the stat the other day that I heard that 40% of all crime in the UK is actually financial crime, right? Financial fraud and crime. And so what we're seeing is a lot of fraud type transactions and, impact on our customers. And so therefore we're bolstering our teams. And you've probably seen in the media a lot of work that we've done around that to support our customers. Now, that impacts our people, right? So we know that we're going to have teams that are going to be busy. So we know that whenever we bring in that type of work, or we bring in some change to our business, that's the time to doing those risk assessments, right? And it's kind of like, if you think about, if you brought in a piece of machinery into a business, you'd do a risk assessment on it, right? You wouldn't just plonk that machine in the factory floor and let it take people's fingers off. You'd be thinking,
legal requirement,
okay,
both to do the assessment and also to talk to your team when you use it, and actually get them part of the decision process even before the machine arrives as to what machine we're going to have. That's the requirement, right?
So we introduce, we're aware of risk coming into our business. How can we risk assess that? Focus on the risk rather than the people, right? And I think that's something that maybe businesses could start with by saying, hey, let's not introduce any new psychosocial risk into our business, and start with that. And then, the regulator comes along and visits and says, hey, what are you guys doing around psychosocial risk? And you say, hey, well, we risk assess any new work that comes to us so that we can understand what the impact might be on our people. And simple as that. But that's what I would advise. Don't take a scattergun approach. Don't do everything at once. Just keep it simple. The other little piece of advice that I heard from, one of the lawyers at one of the conferences was, you can sleepwalk your way into trouble. In other words, do something. Think what's right for your business. Work with your leaders. Don't try and do it all at once, and just pick the top one or two things and do it well. Would I say that I've done that always? No, and I've made a few mistakes. But hey, we're giving it a go.
Nice. And let's push into that a bit more, Terry. So looking at what you're doing at ASB or from your previous roles, what are some of the key processes or approaches that you've done that have really helped embed psychosocial risk management into core health and safety practice?
Yeah, sure. And I could share some of the controls that we have across the bank. In other words, these are kind of, because that's what people want to know, right? Never mind about the risk. What are the controls? What are the things that we're doing to buy down that risk? What are the things that we've got in place? And I would encourage any business to do this, is to just simply do what we've done here, and actually just write down all of those things that you're currently doing around this risk, to be able to actually, because there's no silver bullets, right? We know that. We know that not one of these things is going to make the most difference. Although we just talked about job risk assessment and job design being really important, all the other little things that add up to a lot will make a difference. So sitting down with pen and paper, or working, with the teams that know about the various things that we're doing, and actually just getting them down on paper, and then popping them under what we've got here, a delivery model. Now this is this is protect, foster, support, and restore. But shout out to Hilary Bennett and the team, obviously at New Zealand CEO Forum as well, Business Leaders Forum, for providing us with a nice, easy delivery model that we can put all the controls under, and just put them out, list them, and then just work out, okay, of these ones, which ones do you think have a high impact, going to make a big difference, versus what things are medium and low? And then you'll be surprised at how many gaps you don't have.
How did this get received, Terry?
It resonated. I think it's resonated with people often outside of the business more so than inside, because inside of the business it was like, great, actually we're doing some okay things here and we're not completely lost. But outside of the business, I've shown this to a number of audiences that have said, that kind of makes sense, really. There's nothing on that list that doesn't, for me, feel like a natural control that we can actually, hand on our heart, say that we're doing.
Yep.
Equally, there might be some things on this list that you might go, actually, we could strengthen this, we could strengthen that, and it is continuous improvement, as we know.
You mentioned before, and a question's popped up around, and this is not about calling you out, but making some mistakes, or maybe not doing things as well as you might have done in the first place. Can you share some of those learnings, Terry, that you might have gone down the shiny, the bright, shiny option because you thought it was either an easy option or what was required, but actually turned out to be not as effective or as important?
Yeah, and I think not only at ASB, but elsewhere where we've done risk assessments, and then we perhaps haven't set up teams well enough to have the controls in place, or to follow up on the actions, or to get the real team ownership to actually follow up and own their plans, or their plans to actually reduce risk, right? And that's one thing that you've actually got to impress, I think, as any sort of generalist in this area, is that, hey, we can get things started, but there needs to be a sense of ownership, and there needs to be an ownership around those that create risk. You know, own the risks. In other words, you know, we cannot do this alone, and do not be a lone wolf like I've tried in the past, where you come along, help people identify risk, and then you leave them in that risk, you know, in that environment to wallow. You got to hold their hand, you got to support them. This is new to them. That's the biggest risk, I think, and one of the biggest mistakes I've made is where you leave people with a sense of, oh my God, there's all this risk, what do I do with it? So it's again, just helping them through that, making sure that they have that sense of comfort that you follow up, and it's not often that you necessarily need to do it for them, but just, you know, making sure you walk alongside them.
Vanessa, as the regulator, does this warm the cockles of your heart, seeing an influential organisation, a company like ASB in New Zealand, putting so much time, effort and resource into this particular part of their risk management?
It does, and I think we've got quite a patchwork of approaches, and so it's really great to share examples like this so that we can replicate it. I do feel like sometimes we're kind of down in the weeds and still kind of understanding what mental health is, and other times you see great leaps forward as far as understanding and not even having to explain the benefit. I mean, the return on investment for businesses to address this area is, you know, you're going to see, well, you're going to be an attractive employer. You're going to see a lot less sick leave. You're going to increase your productivity. There's been a lot of return on investments that show that this is beneficial. So I see this as a win-win. I know that workers do want to go to a workplace where they feel supported and understood and have a sense of belonging and contribution. I think this is a bit of a cultural shift for us to start to see things, see work as the kind of people trying to achieve things together, and not machines. You know, the scientific method of you know, Taylorism, where we thought we were cogs in a machine. We're not. When we give people pieces of work, we've got emotions and a range of different responses that can actually either create the impetus to do something or create barriers. So I think we've got a way to go to kind of understand that. But from a health and safety perspective, just capturing those things and trying to work on the controls, which is something that is still emerging evidence. We don't really know that X is necessarily going to lead to Y. And part of that is because of the interaction of factors that we see. So that kind of protective factors like good leadership and support can mitigate some of the risks around other harms. So it's not a 1 plus 1. And what we want to do as we go forward is start to provide more clarity around the interaction of factors and how they kind of cluster together, so that we can not just go one by one, but actually raise it up a level and start to think about the entire kind of ecology of the workplace.
Terry, can you share an example of a structured risk management approach that you actually delivered that successfully helped a team do those first stages: identify, assess, and control psychosocial risks before they escalated?
Just going through that and doing a simple risk assessment, whether it be, you know, Excel or Microsoft Forms, and, you know, working through a bit of a survey. If you can pop that up on screen, using that format might be really helpful for others as well, to identify what are those things that actually matter in that team.
Just go back.
Yeah, so I've done a bit of this, and And then playing it back, what are the top 3 things that are not only hinders, what are the things that are hindering us or getting in the way, but what are those things that are helpers? What are the things actually that we're really good at? And what I'm finding is actually a lot of the things that we're really good at is that leadership, support, and culture. But how can we leverage those things to actually do better at the other things that we're weaker at? So not just providing people with a view of what we're bad at and the risks and the scary things, but actually the things that we're really good at too. And then, for example, one-to-ones as a good leadership, a simple leadership strategy to make sure everybody's getting regular one-to-ones has a huge amount of protective factor in it. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so getting back to where I've worked with a team is to basically come up with a team plan that has 2 or 3 themes and 2 or 3 under each, so that it's not an overwhelming plan that's not hard. But we recently worked with a team, and one of the biggest factors for them is that they had a plan and a strategy, but they didn't have a way of then communicating that with their key stakeholders. So they spent some time communicating their plan and their strategy with their key stakeholders. It sounds really simple, right? But you'd be surprised at how many of the key stakeholders were influencing their workload and their work demands, but actually they had never really communicated their strategy and their way of working with that team to be able to then get that kind of shared ownership and that shared understanding and managing expectations of others. But once they did that, that was then, okay, so every time I ask a question, it causes a big ripple effect. Or, every time I change something slightly different in a product, that's going to have a big impact on this other team. So it's about thinking of what is the impact that I have on others. But it was a really good exercise in that actually just by sharing and communicating stuff and being open and honest with the impact that it has on them as to sort of how much they could reduce the risk for themselves. Yeah. And often, if I can digress slightly, often what you find is that teams feel like they don't necessarily have a sense of control over their workloads or their work demands. But when you drill down and ask questions about who does have control over the workload and work demands, actually it's people within the room, right? It's often those frontline and middle management leaders that don't actually understand that they had the agency to actually have control over that if only they ask.
Yeah, absolutely. It segues nicely into our next question, which is really around leadership and worker engagement and how that interrelationship works. So Vanessa, question for you to start with. How do you believe leaders can really empower their people to be part of the solution, spotting risks early, raising concerns, and then shaping those safer ways of working together? What's the, Terry's acknowledged a few things, but from your perspective, what's really the leader's role in this process?
Yeah, well, it depends on how you define leadership. I mean, I think there are different levels of leadership. I think HSRs are leaders in that regard as well, but it's everything. Relationships are the foundation of mentally healthy work. If you feel like you can have those conversations with a leader and there is good worker engagement, I think you're halfway there. What I would say is that you need to front up, but not overpromise. I think sometimes when people get started on this journey of mentally healthy work, they look at all their hazards, they identify their risks, and then they try and do too much at once. This is a process of trial and error. If I can use an analogy, it's a lot more like jazz than necessarily a concerto or something where everybody knows what their notes are. So there's a lot of trial and error. I think the important thing as far as building up a good culture is actually doing something, doing it well, and then being able to leverage that into trialing it in some other way. And that includes acknowledging where you're doing things right. So don't expect to have all the answers. and also speak to the people closest to the work. They might have the best feedback around what the risks are and what potentially the controls are, or what other interventions might help surface those controls. So it's really based on conversations, it's based on relationships. And, you know, leaders, they control the resourcing and the focus and the targeting of things. So we really do need leaders to be stepping up in this area. And it requires a little bit of vulnerability and a little bit of, I'm not too sure what to do. But I think that honesty goes a long way, and bringing other people into the conversation. So it's more of a collaborative approach rather than, you know, I know what to do.
Thanks, Vanessa. Hey, the time is quickly flying by, as we expected it would do. Let's talk about technology. For example, you know, what we know well at ecoPortal, we've just launched a new psychosocial risk management solution, and that brings together all the components: hazard identification, reporting, surveys, incident reporting, culture, and climate monitoring. And that is really to help organizations create some really good, holistic, meaningful insights. And then as data and then AI tools become more embedded into workplace practices, what should companies keep in mind when using digital tools to identify patterns and risks related to psychosocial well-being? And also there's some questions around from I've seen come through asking Terry as well, like what tools do you actually use at ASB regarding digital tools in this particular space? So I'll start with you, Terry.
Yeah, we actually did a process of actually trying to understand what data we already have, and I think that was a really good light bulb from us to start with. We're not diving deep straight into using, you know, a new shiny tool, although there's some really good tools like ecoPortal that have finally arrived. It's fantastic that we actually got those tools now, and I'd encourage people to use them. But for us, it was a little bit of that foundational stuff around, okay, what is it we're currently doing? So we were asking 5 questions in our engagement survey that were all around wellbeing and mentally healthy work. So actually going, okay, we've got those 5 points. What are some other points we've got? We've obviously got absenteeism, sickness, harassment, and bullying data. We also had some really interesting data, and we talk about AI here, but really interesting data from Viva Insights. And I didn't know much about it, but you know how it's Microsoft Insights. But essentially what it is it's looking at how much people spend in Microsoft applications on their computers at work. And so you can have a look at how much time people are working at weekends and after hours. So with that job demand and workload thing, how much is it's pushing into the evenings and in the weekends? And then you can drill down on that data and go, okay, well, let's filter out those things that, you know, when people are actually legitimately working on the weekend. And then look at across teams and divisions, you know, not looking at individuals, but look across teams and divisions and using all of that bigger data to actually go, where the areas where we're seeing a lot of this. And we can see from that we've definitely got roles, but also teams that are doing a lot of evening and weekend work just to keep up. So those are the sort of things that we can actually identify across data that we already have, right? And then looking at, you know, your traditional things like EAP data and other ones to try and, I guess, develop a comprehensive picture rather than focusing in on what we would traditionally do around EAP data, which is often about relationships and often about, you know, finances, as I mentioned earlier. But your EAP data might not tell you that you've got problems. All it might tell you is that you've got a bunch of people that have health-seeking or help-seeking behaviour. That's a good thing that they are reaching out for help. So I think it's just triangulating all of the data sets that you've currently got, and you may be surprised at how much you've currently got, but you're not bringing in centrally and collecting it centrally and using tools like Power BI, for example, putting into your ecoPortal or putting that data into tools that will actually make it work for you, right? Anyway, I'll get off the soapbox there, but I'm not a big data person. I'm deeply cynical about data, but I do love that kind of Einstein quote that, you know, not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts.
Very insightful there, Terry. Great way. Vanessa, any thoughts on on technology, on AI tools, on data lakes, on all those components of providing a digital tool to people to either report or triage and assess this information?
I think it's vital. It comes back down to the Health and Safety Committee, and raising those risks up to different levels of the organization. I think that it helps you prioritize. You cannot do it all at once. So anything that helps you give you a sense of what you're going to go out with first, because that will be really important to kind of build a sense of success and a sense of, motivation to be able to do it. So I do think it's very important. And then validating that with conversations is the important thing. So, you know, yeah, that's and I like the idea of AI being able to help us with that. But I haven't seen any great examples so far about how that's worked in practice. But I'm really hopeful for the future in that regard.
We'll set you up with a session, Vanessa, and we'll show you what good looks like.
Yes, thank you.
Terry, your example around using Microsoft monitoring tools, did that create any angst around the staff feeling that they were being monitored, Big Brother was watching? Or how did you provide some context around the why you were doing that?
Yeah, it needs to be aggregated, right? And it needs to be broad enough and large enough teams so that nobody's personally identifiable. That's the key, is that you're not looking for personally identifiable information. It's about looking at the whole and the aggregate in those larger teams, as opposed to drilling right down into small teams. And it's absolutely critical. You got to do that for trust and confidence in that data. So that's a really good point that you make.
Cool. Vanessa, how can workplaces tailor psychosocial support to individuals who are returning to work after a mental injury? Often return to work plans are really focused purely on physical return to work, light duties, alternate duties. How can we best tailor support for those returning from mental injuries?
One, understand that there is stigma associated with a mental injury versus a physical injury. So a lot of information and support for people to understand that. Stay connected with the people. Consider things like recovery at work. Sometimes to recover, you don't need to leave. There can be some accommodations that keeps people connected in. We see that the best responses or the best recovery tends to happen when people are still connected in with their workplace. There's a real barrier once you get extracted out from away from that. It's an area I'm particularly interested in, and I know ACC is interested in. We know that if you have a mental injury, you're more likely to take more time off work. And I think that's partly our discomfort with kind of understanding that and being comfortable with having those conversations. But staying connected is really the big part there.
Nice. When looking at the workload, and Terry, from a frontline perspective, this is quite relevant. When looking at the workload and mental health balance, any tips to navigate the balance of wanting to be supportive but still being productive? I can understand exactly where this question is coming from. So we've got a manager that wants delivery, wants results, but also wants to be productive, also wants to be supportive of their team. Any tips in this space?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to that old saying, hey, good health and safety is good for business, right? If you do this well, and if you do this genuinely, you'll get productivity in return. But what's really interesting to me, and I was been thinking about this a little bit lately, is when we talk about mental health and well-being at work and all things psychosocial risk, we often flick to what are the benefits, what's the return on investment, what's the productivity, what's the kind of benefits here from a kind of productivity level. And but when we talk about safety, we don't, do we? We talk about, oh, we're going to stop people from being injured. We're going to send people home safely. Why do we do that? Why do we think that doing things around mentally healthy work and well-being is all about productivity? We need to start flipping the dial and actually go, you know what? We're going to be safer. You know what? We're going to be able to go home safe. You know what? we're going to be better off for it. Stop thinking about this as being all about the dollar. Yeah.
Anything to add to that, Vanessa? It's an interesting point.
Yeah. It's a curious one. I mean, I've spent over a decade essentially trying to talk about return on investment. You could talk about it from a legal, a moral, financial, organizational perspective. Really, I would love to see in the future that we're just saying, it's a legal obligation, it's beneficial for everybody, and not necessarily expect a return on investment. You can see when workplaces are humming and they're doing really well. You've got less conflict. You've got more problem solving. That's where I'd like to go. We're people.
Yeah, we'll get that. As Alicia says there, if we do this right, we'll get the productivity anyway. If we do this right, we will see returns tenfold.
People are definitely agreeing with you there, Terry. That's for sure. Hey, team, I'm going to start to wrap things up from here. Psychosocial topic has been one of the most popular requested topics, and I feel we've only just scratched the surface. And so I feel there is many more things that we can talk about this. And so Terry and Vanessa, I feel I'm going to be talking to you again sometime soon in the future, I'm sure, in a slightly different angle. So any feedback and suggestions of topics or just in general is really appreciated from all of us. But while you're doing that, that's a final wrap from us. Vanessa and Terry, thank you for sharing so much of your time and expertise, and to all of you for joining us and contributing to the conversation. The floor is yours for a 30-second sum up individually. I'm sure, if there's one key takeaway that the audience can go back to work with, what would you recommend? Vanessa, as a final summary from you.
Well, of course, read the Managing Psychosocial Guidelines and have a think about how those risks show up in your workplace. Remember, you don't have to address every hazard. It's just the risks that are specific for you and your people. And Godspeed.
Awesome. Thanks, you. And Terry, any final words?
Take myself off mute. I'm just going to put a little plug in for WW Workplace Wellbeing Professionals Aotearoa. Just a little plug. If you like what you hear, you want to get involved, you want to be part of the solutions rather than part of the problem, come join us. It's a place to belong. So we'll just pop that in the chat.
Yep, just done that again. Fantastic. Well, thank you, everyone. We really hope that everyone has been leaving with some really useful insights on how to build safer, more supportive workplaces for your staff, your customers, and your brand. Until next time, thanks, Terry. Thanks, Vanessa. Take care. Stay safe. Airera. Thank you for listening to safetyCast. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, and share with your colleagues, because safety knowledge is meant to be shared. Stay safe, stay engaged, and be sure to catch our next episode for more expert insights. See you then.